able to. Meeting is being recorded. Huh?
Yes, because there's some people that couldn't make it tonight, but are very interested in the topic.
Yeah. Okay.
Cross our fingers that it is actually recording into the queue.
I'm sure it is. Hi, Bernice.
Hi, I don't know who.
Oh, I thought it was on your screen, like mine says this, and I thought I thought you had to do that.
Is that Ann Cat said that?
It's Ann Katz that said that, Bernice. Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, Leslie and Judy.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, Nina
Hi.
and Jack. We got a lot of new people. So maybe since we do have a fair amount of people here, maybe we should start, and then other people can join us if they're a little bit late. So I just want to welcome everyone. Thank you for attending our second Adult Ed program for this year on accessing family history and genealogy. I think I know everybody here, but for those of you I haven't met, my name is Ann Katz, and this is my second year as the chairperson for adult education. Last year, the theme for adult ed was healing through Jewish values. We had a variety of speakers, all of whom were congregants at Temple Beth David, including 3 psychologists, a rabbi, social worker, a female engineer talking about overcoming obstacles during communist Romania, a book discussion, and classes taught by our scholar in residence, all addressing healing through Jewish values from many different perspectives. If you are interested in viewing any of these prior programs, they are on Temple Beth David's website under the tab Adult Education. This year, the Adult Education Committee sent out a survey to congregants asking for input regarding programming. Based upon the results, the committee decided on the theme, Creating a Caring Community. Each of our programs is targeting this topic from different perspectives. Our kickoff program this past October was a program with 3 extraordinary panelists that addressed healing, hope, and heart. I would like to thank the Adult Education Committee for their commitment and support in making our programs happen. A special shout out to our executive director and rainmaker, Bobby Sadow, and a newcomer to our team, Gabrielle Benheim. For tonight's program, I would like to introduce a very special person and friend. He has been his family's go-to family historian since 1977, when he began researching all 4 branches of his family's history. To date, he has over 2,000 relatives in his genealogy program with their vital statistics.
Oh, goodness.
Utilizing his research skills, he has purposed 4 of his European trips to Sweden, Poland, Slovakia, and Romania for genealogy research. Here he has delved into regional archives where he has successfully discovered many of his ancestors' birth, death, cemetery, and land records. His research has allowed him to connect with 15 of his Swedish cousins in the birthplace of his great-grandfather. His expertise includes the sophisticated use of Ancestry.com, newspapers.com, the link to Eastern European data banks and sources within the United States. Our guest speaker holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Miami, a master's degree in history from New York University, and has audited 8 courses in the graduate schools of Yeshiva University, Indiana University, and the University of Connecticut, specializing in European studies. He has presented this program at synagogues, libraries, and to the 117-year-old Historic Circumnavigators Club. In addition, he is a frequent contributor to the North Jersey Historical Society periodicals. He is the past international president of the Circumnavigators Club. He also is in his 38th year as a senior vice president of investments with Wells Fargo Advisors, with the designation as one of the firm's premier advisors. His grandparents were early settlers in Miami Beach in the 1920s. His great-grandfather was one of the founders of Miami Beach's oldest synagogue, Beth Jacob, which currently is the home of the Miami Jewish Museum. It is my honor and delight to introduce Mr. Howard Matson.
And thank you very much. I'd like to meet this wonderful person you talked about. I wanted to thank you all for inviting me. Anne has given my educational background, and I wanted to tell you all that the talk tonight is going to be informal. I would like you to interrupt me. I'd like you to have questions. I want you to have your input, and I want everyone to really participate in this. Probably all of you on here have a general knowledge of genealogy and have done it to a certain advanced degree. So I'm not going to start with the very, very basics. But I do want to tell you how I came to genealogy. I was very fortunate in Passaic, New Jersey, where Ann and I grew up in adjoining towns, to live next door to my grandparents, who were dynamic people until I was about 10 years old. And my grandfather had this fabulous life of an immigrant kid whose first job was in the Thomas Edison labs, who sailed around the world with Teddy Roosevelt's Great White Fleet, who was the first Jewish ranger in Yellowstone Park, was in the fledgling Air Corps of World War I, and then a bootlegger during Prohibition. And he enthralled my sister and I and my cousins with all of his stories. And I found myself at a certain point in the 1970s, before he died, sitting there way pre-computer when you had a yellow legal pad and just writing things down. And he would skip around and tell different stories, and the trip around the world, and you know, gangster talk, and then to Yellowstone Park. And I just wrote things down and kept writing and writing. And writing. So
I'm what?
at a certain point in the late 1970s, I decided to start collating everything and putting the information down. And, you know, from that is how it developed into this program now, where it has culminated in that I privately published a 100-page history book of my grandfather's branch of the family, and was able to disseminate it to all of my cousins. So I like that. I can't see everybody's screen with the way that I'm set up, but I always like to start this with showing how important genealogy is. So this starts out easy, but I want everyone to participate. So raise a hand if you can name both of your parents and your mother's maiden name. Okay, now raise a hand if you can name your 4 grandparents.
Want to sit here, Mom?
And now raise a hand if you can name both of your grandmother's maiden names. And raise a hand if you can name up to 8 of your great-grandparents. And now you see why genealogy is important, how quickly we lose information if it's not written down. That's the whole thing. The history of the world from the Greeks and the Hebrews and everything was handing down stories and handing down more stories, and that's how literature eventually started. But particularly with genealogy, if you don't write these things down, then they're lost. And it's not just history that's lost, but it's people. And people are alive when you tell these stories. I almost think that it's like when you go to the cemetery and put a stone on their gravestone. If you tell a story about someone, I think it does the same thing. So the other thing that's wonderful about doing genealogy, why I recommend it to everybody, it is a low cost hobby to have, and it's a never ending hobby. There is always another branch of the family to add on to. There is always new information that can be received from a relative that's found, and another branch or another leaf on the chart goes up, and it's a wonderful thing to do. The other thing that's really wonderful about doing this and sharing it and talking to your family is that it is wonderful to have an expansive family around you. When I talked about growing up in Passaic, I had a set of great-grandparents who both lived to be 100 and were married for 72 years. And in my town, within 5 miles, were their 7 children, their 21 grandchildren, and their 42 great-grandchildren. So I truly lived a life up until I was 10, 11 years old, where if I went to a movie, I went to a restaurant, I walked downtown, I got on a bus, there was a relative on it. There was always a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, someone on it. And Anne touched on the fact that in one of my trips to Europe, I went to Sweden, where my great-grandfather was born, and working for about 10 years with a librarian in Falkenberg, Sweden, I now have about a dozen or 15 cousins over there that through Facebook, I'm in touch with. And when they come to the United States, they've stayed in our home, and we go over and see them over there. And particularly for children, your grandchildren, it's an important thing, whether it's through Facebook or through your motivation and your stories, that they find different people and different cousins. And it is a very, very secure feeling in the world to know that you have this network family out there. So the most important thing to start, if you're doing genealogy, is start sitting down and writing everything down. Write everyone's relatives down, all of your parents, sisters and brothers, your grandparents, sisters and brothers, every bit of information that you could possibly know. And put down as close to birth dates as you can find. And years of death, wedding anniversaries, maiden names, cemeteries, stories that they might have told about their immigration, or when they first came to New York on the Lower East Side. For many of you who are in New York or in the New York area, if you have children or grandchildren or young cousins, a great place to take them is to the Tenement Museum in New York City's Lower East Side. It's a great experience where you can show kids what it was like 100 years ago, 120 years ago, when our relatives came over. When we took my daughter Leslie there, it was a group tour of about, 20, 25 people. And we walked up the stairs into one of the sample tenement apartments. And there was a bed there on the springs, like in an Abbott and Costello movie. And they took 4 of the girls who were in Leslie's age, 7, 8 years old. And they said, all right, all of you lay down in the bed. And they said, that's how you would have been sleeping with all of your sisters. And everyone was given a chore to do in the museum. And they said to my daughter, you're going to be doing the laundry. And they handed her a wet shirt, and she had to go over to the sink. And there was an old-fashioned washboard in the sink. And kids today, the generation of today, has no clue about that, none whatsoever. And it's a very, very hands-on thing. The other thing that I recommend is that when you're talking to older people, to get their stories and everything, people don't always remember an exact date. You can't say to them when, what year did that happen in? But individuals correlate things with historic events. I said to my grandparents, when did your parents come over? And my grandmother didn't remember a year, but she said, I remember my father said when he got here, it was the blizzard of 1888, and he was here for that. So when I did my research, I could narrow down to 2 or 3 years of when they came. But people relate things, with the signposts of history. They can tell you where they were during the Depression. They can tell you where they were on December 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor. They could talk about presidential elections, who they voted for. Just like all of us, the JFK assassination is yesterday in our minds. And we can tell the details of that day as much as if we talk about what we had for breakfast this morning. So doing that, the next step after you have those is to have some sort of system to have everything. And there's not one that's any better than the other. There is Family Tree Maker, there's Ancestry, there's My Heritage. A smart grandchild or son could develop your own software program to put things in on, but you can plug in all this information and add the data as you're going along. And the other good thing about doing it on the computer is that you can share it with family members as you're doing it, and they can add things to it and they can put corrections in. So since all of us I think are pretty astute with everything, I wanted to take the time to show you web pages to give you a general idea of what's there and things that are worthwhile joining. This page, can everyone see the page in front of you, Ancestry, and it says all results for Francis P. Matson? Everyone see that? The Ancestry.com is terrific. When I go back and talk about the 1970s and 1980s, I used to go to the library on 42nd Street in New York, and by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, my eyes were down here from looking at microfilm all day. All of everything that's sitting here in front of us now, you had to go into New York, you had to look at microfilm. Records for immigration were kept in a warehouse at the Marine Terminal in Bayonne, New Jersey, and they were on 3x5 index cards. And you had to go there and go through things like that. If you wanted to read an old newspaper, you had to go to the actual newspaper headquarters. They would have something called the morgue, and they would literally bring out the old papers for you to go through to look at. Nowadays, you can put your sweats on, go to a website like Ancestry.com, and everything in the world is in front of you. And the good thing about them is they are continually adding things, not just from the United States, but internationally. So I don't know how many people, I can't see everybody, but are there people here who are using Ancestry now?
No.
So what I have on here now is to show you as an example is I've put my dad's name in. And I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that come up.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Did you have to did you have to subscribe to Ancestry to get
Yes.
this information?
Well, there's 2 points with Ancestry.com. They have different levels of membership. I'm a full member to access everything, and that's about $200 a year. But one of the things to look at is many public libraries have it for free.
Okay.
So and particularly during the pandemic, I know that the town of Westport and the town of Weston started offering it because people were housebound and they wanted to offer things. But, you know, for a hobby to cost you $200 a year is very reasonable, you know, and I recommend it and I use it and it's very easy to use.
Okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that are on here. And what I've put up is my dad's name. And what you're looking on here first with my pointer, you see Skelly family tree. So I have done a family tree, which I have posted on here, and you will find that different relatives take your family tree and append it onto theirs, which is really a good thing because it's expanding it and it's more and more data on here. S. Kelly happens to be one of my first cousin's daughters who lives out in Los Angeles. And they give a sample of what I posted on the tree. But if, say I didn't know anything about my dad's background, by just looking at the item from the family tree, I'm getting my mother's name with her maiden name, my dad's name, my grandmother's name with her maiden name, my sister's name, my dad's date and place of birth, and his date and place of death. And show you other things that are on here that have been placed by different government agencies and newspapers and things like that. But here is my dad's veterans record, and it's telling me that he went into the Army, and it gives me the date that he enlisted, and it gives me the date that he was discharged, coming back to New York. The next one down is his obituary, and this was his obituary, the article that was in the Bergen Record, which was in New Jersey. And I could, if I clicked on it, it would bring up the article. The next thing is that if you were looking, you didn't know whether someone was deceased or not in your family, Social Security does post everyone who got Social Security, their date of death. And, you know, in the state of information, there's my dad's Social Security number, which makes people happy and makes some people very uncomfortable. But it's just something to be aware of that they do that. And again, the government agency. Here is the government agency from the state of Florida. Again, they had a death certificate in Palm Beach County, so they post the record here. Going further down, my mom and dad were married in Miami Beach. The story is that they were going to
Cool.
elope.
All right, we'll touch base later and we'll get filled in, and I'll see you.
They were going to elope.
Could everybody, excuse me, Howard, could everybody please mute yourselves? And then if you have a question for Howard, you can unmute yourself. Thank you.
But this is a copy of their marriage license from 1950, where they got married in Miami. Then further down, this is an article where my father's name was cited when my sister got married, for an article in the newspaper. This is a citation when I got married. And again, my father's, you have a computer that's just picking up my dad's name anywhere. This is Dade County posting my parents' record of their marriage in Miami. And the rest of these are just newspaper articles about my dad. But what I did want to show, so that you can see something else that I find very interesting on here. If you just give me 1 second, I think I can get there. Here is, you see by putting in there, my dad's middle initial was P. So this is another tool. You have to use different names. My dad's name was Francis, but there are some records under Francis P, some under Francis, some under Frank. Here is my dad's veterans record. Here is when he enlisted. This is interesting. This is a copy of his draft card. Let's see if I can pull it up for you so you can see a simple example. All right, and here's in his writing with his signature where he lived in New York. He was working at Kellogg's. And if you, I don't know if I can go to the next page, but on the next page, it gives his height and weight and color of his eyes. And then the other thing I wanted to show you, which I find very interesting, is, again, which you can all look at for your family members, is universities post their yearbooks now. And I don't have a simple way of getting there, and I don't want to hold you up. But the university, my dad went to the University of Miami, and his yearbook is on here, and you can pull up the page where his picture is. So these are all different little things that you can look at. So does anyone have any questions about ancestry.com?
Yes. Can you show how you structured your query?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up on me. Or Ann, if you can hear, repeat it to me.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, Donnie. Yeah, please put it in the chat.
And then Ann, if you could repeat it to me, because I'm not able to
I will.
chat here.
Yep, I will.
But I just want you to know that on here, and I could use other examples to go through, but for instance, immigration records are on here, ship manifests are on here. My grandparents went to Europe often, and I can put their names in and their manifests come up and it'll say, 1927 Queen Mary, and it will actually have a copy of the manifest. And not just from something like that, but I have been able to put in, I had in my family, my great grandparents in 1891 sent their eldest daughter, when I say eldest daughter, she was 15 years old. They sent her from Hungary to the United States to find an apartment in New York. And again, this is just a family fable, but lo and behold, if I go through here, there's Aunt Lena arriving in June of 1891, and it gives the ship name. And you have to think about this. This is someone who left Hungary and probably rode on a train for 10 days to get to Hamburg, and then was on a 3-week boat trip to New York and arrived in a new country with no language. And at 15 years old, found an apartment for her family who came over about 2 months later. So all of this data and information is on here as you go through the research. And the other thing you have to remember, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ed.
So the question that Donnie asked was, can you review how you structured your query to start, especially for someone you are trying to gather information on?
Yes. Ask Donnie what his dad or grandfather's first name is.
All right, Donnie, what's your father's or grandfather's first name?
Ann, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, all right. Samuel Hornstein is my grandfather.
Samuel Hornstein.
Hornstein, okay.
And do you have an approximate year he was born?
Hold on.
And this can be a ballpark.
I'm gonna give you a better than ballpark. I have a lot of information on my grandfather. 1887.
Okay, so I've typed in his name, I've checked off exact, and I'm not checking off for 1887 because a lot of times at censuses and things like that, people round it off. So every Samuel Hornstein is going to come up. But for instance, is Samuel Rubin, is this your grandfather?
No,
Okay, so that's another Samuel Hornstein. And did this is Samuel N. Hornstein, January 1887. Is this him?
no, no.
Okay. And did he live in, so that person lived in California, so I'm assuming it's not all these California people. And,
No, he lived in Connecticut, actually.
well, let's put something in here. All right, is this Samuel Nissen Hornstein your grandfather?
I think that's right.
And his wife was Bertha Smith?
Correct?
His father was Ben. Are you able to see this screen with me?
Yes.
Okay, so his father was Ben. Your grandmother was Esther.
Yeah. This is definitely my grandfather.
All right, and are Castles relatives of yours, cousins?
Not that I know of.
All right, well, someone's out there doing it. And let's look at your grandfather's draft card. So I have Samuel Hornstein in Hartford. And this is him.
This is definitely him. Yeah.
Okay, and you can see his signature on the bottom.
And let me give you a hard one.
All right. Hold on.
Let's start over with a hard one.
Okay, hold on. Go ahead.
That's all right. Okay. First name in America, Harry. But from Poland, it would have been Hersh. Last name, Nidriger, Nidriger.
Okay. Approximate birth year.
Give me a second.
So while he's looking that up, are you putting in his name here? Because a lot of people change their names, obviously, right?
Exactly. So if you look what I'm doing here, you see how before for my dad, I had exact.
Uh-huh.
I'm taking off exact. So
Okay.
that way, oh, now I'm sorry, I just lost that.
Howard, I'm back.
I'm sorry,
1985.
you need to spell that again, N-I,
Nidriger.
Nide.
Ann, can you repeat that back to me?
No.
George Echo Romeo. George
R-I-
Echo Romeo.
So
G-E-R.
E-R,
There
okay,
you
G-E-R.
One more.
G-E-R-O.
R.
Is that correct?
No, R. No O. No O.
Okay,
There you
Okay,
Need the R.
R, Howard.
Right,
Yeah,
Add
there you
an
go.
R.
and
Okay,
1885.
good. There we go.
And what,
Correct.
I want to
What
take,
about-
I want to take this exact off.
and you might want to take off Connecticut too.
Did he live, he lived in
It's
Connecticut?
Connecticut.
Okay, it is. Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Oh, there you,
Is this it, Harry?
And all right, so there's So it helps. Obviously, this is the right one. The very first one is the right one. I have to find out who these castle people are. But so in this case, for instance, we can see that his father is, it's actually a misspelling, which comes up in Ancestry a lot. It's not Zen Dove. It would be Zev.
Let me just stop you 1 second. Number one, at immigration at Ellis Island or Castle Garden or wherever, you don't really know what somebody wrote down. The other thing is that
Right.
this is a computer program reading a piece of paper. And if we took everyone on this Zoom tonight and said, write the letter R, a computer would probably read the way our penmanship are, because all of our R's would be written differently. They have a template. So when no one's really standing there writing this into the computer, you have a computer reading 1,000 sheets every 5 minutes and putting it in. So the name could be Zev, it could be Zen. It's just the way the individual wrote the letter and how the computer is reading the letter.
I understand.
Howard, I have
So,
another question. Oh,
I
sorry.
think it was. Let me just ask this last question. I'm sorry, I'm taking up a lot of time. In both of these cases, Howard, we knew the individual's approximate date of birth. But if we look, for instance, at this record of my maternal grandfather, even if we use the Zen Dove, I have no idea when he was born.
Well,
So
I'm going to tell you
the
the
more
best way
important question to me is,
I'm going to tell you the best way to learn that. He arrived in 1913. So what you want to do when you're doing genealogy is get as close to the original as possible. So let's go to census records. And the only census record that comes up is 1940. In 1940, it says 1886, where you said 1887. But this just happens to be the example. There's only one census record. But for instance, for my great-grandfather, I have a census record from 1900 through 1940, 4 different censuses. And every single one has a different age. Because, sometimes they wanted to be a little older, sometimes they wanted to be a little younger, sometimes they were rounding off. So you're never going to know exactly. And on one of my grandfather from Passaic always told me he was born in the town of Hupgard. I was born in Hupgard. I said, one day I'm going to go to Hupgard. I looked at maps for 40 years and could never find Hupgard. Now, I finally found it about 10 years ago, and it's now in northern Slovakia. It's got a population of less than Palm Beach Gardens. There's 300 people there. And I went into the archives for Hupgard, and we're all taught about how Jewish records are destroyed. Not at all, saved everywhere. And they brought out a book of Jewish births. And not only did I find my grandfather's birth date, but I found all 7 of his siblings exactly. And my grandfather always had the right birthday. However, my Aunt Lena was 2 years older than she said. My Aunt Bertha was a year older than she said. So on these census records, this is a 1940, but for a certain individual, you might see 1890, 1900, 1910. It's going to be different on all of them. None of them are exactly the same.
So Howard, another question that came up, if Donnie wanted to connect with the Castle family, how would he do that?
Well, let's find out. All right, so let's click on the Castle family tree. And let's click on, this is who put it in. Someone whose email address is momwork2. And if you click on her, gives the date she joined, and gives you some of her family trees. And I cannot enlarge this page. Oh, right here, message. You click on message, click on her and say, I am so-and-so. And it seems our common relative is XYZ. How are we related?
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So are there any other questions? It's very
do-
all encompassing about it, but I want to show you some other websites to look at.
One question that came up too, Howard, was please show how to find an immigration record.
Okay, so. This is my great-grandfather from Romania. And 1855. Now, this is not an interesting story, but sort of you talk about the hard things that our families went through. My great-grandfather Simon and his wife, he was an engineer in Romania, got all the family together, 8 kids, and bought 10 passages over on the SS Patricia. He was 43 years old. When he was on the ship, he caught pneumonia. They arrived in New York, got an apartment on the Lower East Side, and 6 weeks after arriving in America, he died. So you have to think about his wife, Caroline, with her 8 kids from ages 1 to 18 in a brand new country, brand new language, brand new culture. Imagine I take you, Leslie, and I take you with your 8 kids and send you to Uzbekistan, and this befalls you. And you have to think, and this is the life. But I want to show you because I do know his immigration record is on here. So I'm going to, on the left, it says immigration. And I want to see passenger lists. And not only here is my great-grandfather arriving from Bremen. But if you go to Hamburg, you can see the incoming, and then you can see the outgoing. Obviously, that's written in German. So over here, you have the different things where they come in. And that's the immigration. And then, if they travel to Europe during up until, I don't know, 1950, all the ship manifests, every ship that arrived in New York, the Queen Mary, the Normandy, the Aquitania, there's a copy of the manifest. And it doesn't give it gives the name, address, your passport number, and information about you. I want to go forward and show you another interesting website that's got good information. Now, I was lucky in my life, and that I got to be friends with Anne's father, who lived to be 100. And there is a website called Find a Grave. And not everyone, but people do this. They go to cemeteries, they photograph the stones, and they put that on. And this is if someone took a photo of your dad's stone, and it tells me, I look for information, it's going to tell me his birth date, where he was born, his death date, where he died, the name of the cemetery, the name of the plot, if I wanted to go there. They show a picture of it. And further down, because someone on here, these all are interconnected with codes. So his mother's name was Sadie. And click on here. You see that she's buried in the same cemetery. And it gives, again, her birth date, her death date, where she is and everything, and a copy of her stone. And it gives you her Hebrew name. and going back to your dad. But your mom is there, and his two sisters, Rose. I don't know if you did.
Yes.
She's also in the same. She's also in Menorah. And
Yeah, they're all there.
Okay, so Rose is there, and I think there was a second sister, Sarah.
Yeah, there was also a third sister. I don't think she's buried there because she lived in California, but there was a third sister.
Why? You never know. Why don't? Just a minute. Go back. I'm sorry that I'm not more technologically advanced, that I'm taking your time doing this. I don't think I can go backwards on here, but I did want to show you, this is a website. It's called findagrave.com. And you can put any name in there. And, you know, not just for relatives, you're doing genealogy, just for, you know, in history, you can put in Abraham Lincoln. It shows a picture of his tomb. It shows a picture of his parents, where all of his children are. But so this is like billions and billions on here. Does anyone have any questions about Find a Grave? All right.
No, we do have a question though about the immigration records. Can we find immigration records independent of sites like ancestry.com? Would
You
like
can
to
go-
know
the only-
internet addresses. We
the
can
only
also
site-
visit.
The only site that I know of that this is also posted on is Ellis Island. Ellis Island has a genealogy website. However, the thing to know with Ellis Island is, you have to Google this, but it's only for, Ellis Island was only open certain dates, like 1888 to 1898, and then maybe again from 1905 to 1912. I'm giving you hypotheticals. But there was another place in New York at the Battery called Castle Garden, and a lot of people came in that way. The other thing is that if your family was fortunate enough to not be in steerage, then they did not get off the ship at Ellis Island or Castle Harbor. They went to the actual pier. You know, like if you and I went to Europe, you would go to the pier.
Thank you.
All right. I don't know of any other one besides this in Ellis Island. The next one I wanted to share is.
Howard, I have
Yes.
a question.
Sure.
My name is Elaine Fleischer.
Hi, Elaine.
I've done some research on my father's family that came from Nashelsk, Poland. And it is my understanding that all of the grave sites in Nashelsk, Poland, where my grandmother was buried before my father came to America, there are all desecrated during the war. How do we get to the information about those long gone people when grave sites are gone?
I'm going to show you
And
two.
records are in Polish.
That's a good question, Elaine, and I'm going to show you two examples. This website that I'm showing you now is called jewishgen.com. And this is records from Europe.
.org.
I'm sorry, .org. I apologize. jewishgen.org. And I'm a member of this. I think this costs $100 a year. But you can go in. Now, for instance, Elaine, do you know your grandmother's, well, was she married? Was she married in Europe?
Wait a minute.
She's muted herself.
Oh, Elaine, you muted yourself. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, there we go. Yes, she was married.
What was her married name?
Saltzman.
S-A-L-T.
Tzman.
Okay.
And her husband, my
Well, we're
grandfather.
just gonna do Saltzman for now.
Okay.
And was she, and this is in Poland.
Poland, yes.
Okay, so what I'm pulling up on Jewish Gen now, and we'll narrow down a little bit, but there are 8,668 records for Saltzman.
Oh, great.
However, when you go through this, the top line, there are 279 Saltzman family trees on there.
Mm.
So you know what I want to do is go back a moment, and I want to just see
But
if,
I know where she was buried. She
what
was
is her
in
given
the
name?
Scheldt.
What was her first name?
God, I can't remember at the moment. I have it written down, but I can't
Was
remember it.
your grandfather buried in Poland also?
No, my grandfather was buried in America.
All right, well, you said you knew the name of the town. What is the town?
Yes, Neshelsk.
Can you spell that?
Nashelke, something like that. Neshelsk.
That's why it says phonetically like. Let's
Yeah.
see if anything comes up. And you have 114. You've gone down from 8,000 to 114 records.
Oh, good.
So these are all people who have done research for Saltzman.
Yeah.
So
And
this
spelled it.
this is what I'm trying to say is these are ways to go through this, that the records, to answer your question, all of the records in Europe are on here. Not on here, that are saved, have been translated or are on here. And one of the places in Jewish Gen, I don't know where it is right now, but you can put in a town finder. Now, spell the name of the town for me again.
Nashelki. I think that's the way I spelled it.
All right, let's just see this because I want to. All right, well that doesn't come there. But the point of what I want to show you is, let's keep Lakhnia.
SKI.
Yeah. This didn't change, but this is communities in Europe, and I just happened to pick a town where the names didn't change, but it tells you what the modern town name is, other names it's known as, what after World War II, what it was the name, between the wars, because they changed names, and before World War I. I just happened in front of me to pick a town that didn't have a name change. So you have to play around with this and put that name of that town in with sort of different spellings, and the records may come up in a different name. But this is one of my example tonight is to show you what tools are on here.
Okay, thank you.
So there's huge data, database on here, and Jewish Gen is, to answer your question, primarily Eastern European. I wanted to also show you another website. There. The other one is called cjh.org, which is the Center for Jewish History in New York. And this was founded, there's an organization in New York called YIVO, YVO, which is founded in Vilnius in 1925, the largest collection of Jewish records. And the Evo records are now in the Center for Jewish History. And again, this is another spot, just like this Jewish Gen, that you can go into. You can put a name in, it's got an index, you can put a town name in, and you can see what comes up. There's also another website called JRI dash, and I can put this all on a list to Ann, who can circulate it.
Okay.
JRI, Jack Robert Ida dash Poland.org. And it's Jewish records for all of Poland. And I think that you might have better luck on there than Jewish Gen, although they're really sharing the same records. JRI is specifically the country of Poland, and where the other is all of Eastern Europe. Another thing that is important to do if you have an interest in this is I've been taking auditing graduate classes, as Ann said, at Yeshiva, UConn, and Indiana University, which has a fabulous Jewish studies program. Because you want to really learn, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Poland existed to about the time of the American Revolution. And then there was no Poland. It was divided between the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Habsburg Empire, Russia, and Prussia. So Poland was divided three ways. So there was no Poland after about 1789 until 1919 with the Treaty of Versailles. And Poland then came back. Same thing with Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was created by the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. So all of that vast area where most of our relatives came from was the Habsburg Austro-Hungarian Empire. And Hungary at that time was today's Hungary, Transylvania of Romania, and Slovakia. And when somebody said, I'm from Hungary, they could really be a distance of 1,000 miles apart from one end of Hungary to the other. And it's the same thing with the Habsburg Empire with Austria. Austria controlled Galicia. That was all of southern Poland and part today of the Ukraine. So when someone said, I'm from Austria, they could have been living in today's Ukraine, or they could be living in Yugoslavia, because the Habsburg Empire went all the way into Croatia. So one of the things I recommend, you're all in Florida, whether it's the University of Miami, hop on a train, or Lynn University, or FIU is in Boca. If there is a history class on Eastern European history, go, or senior citizens can audit the class for free. $25 charge probably. And I recommend that to everyone to get a basic idea. A lot of time, my grandfather who said he was Hungarian, today is Slovakia. And, grandparents who said they were Austrian might really be from the Ukraine today. So I recommend that to all of you, if you can. It's fascinating to do. Take a survey course of Eastern Europe.
Howard, we have another question.
Okay.
What is another top website for non-Jewish relatives?
For non-Jewish relatives, I would use Ancestry. For instance, all of my Swedish relatives who are not Jewish, all of their data is on there. And the Swedish cemeteries were the churchyards. Sweden is actually quite wonderful. Genealogists, I love Sweden, because when you lived in a little town in Sweden and you were going to go over to the next town or the next county, you went and you told the parish priest that you were going. So if you were in Falkenberg and going up to Gothenburg, you said, I'm going to Gothenburg tomorrow. And they wrote it down and they kept all of these. So when I went in to do the records, find out when my great-grandfather Peter Matson came to America, it wasn't saying what year. they had the parish record of he left on Wednesday, July 25th, 1870. They knew the exact date that he left. So where Jewish Gen is Jewish data, JRI Poland is Jewish data, Ancestry.com is universal. There's two other places that I know we're running out of time, but I want to tell you about. One is a website, and again, it's part of Ancestry.com, called newspapers.com. And newspapers.com is an index to thousands of local papers all over the United States. So I talked about in the town Passaic, where I'm from, next to Annstown. I put, my family name was Knobloch. I put Knobloch in, and because of the size of the family, and then my grandparents were active and my great-grandparents were active, I came up with like 2,000 news articles since 1900. And it is fascinating to read. Now here, and interesting things you find. Now here, my great-grandfather, dignified man, founder of a temple, president of this, president of that. But when he came to Passaic, he opened up a saloon. So I have the citation from 1905 where he got a summons to come to the magistrate because he served a minor beer. Then in 1908, I have another citation because they had a dance hall in Passaic above his saloon. And he got not arrested, but he got a citation because there was dancing on Sunday. So there's all these fun articles. My mother told me a story once about when she was in high school at Passaic High. She was sitting, they lived in Passaic Park in a big house, and they're out on the front stoop and everything. And Passaic had just played, I don't know, Patterson in football. And they were out with all their friends, and a car went by, and my mother and her friends yelled out, "Yay, Passaic." And the car came back 20 minutes later and said, "Yay, Patterson." And all of them had tomatoes, and they threw them in, and one of them went through the bedroom window and on my grandmother's bedspread. In the Passaic Herald News the next day on the front page, tomato barrage at Knobloch home. So, you know, this is what makes your family and your grandparents and your great-grandparents interesting, to read these things. You know, I got a kick out of when they used to have, you know, these temple luncheons and things like that. They would literally sit there and type 60 names who attended, and you would read all these names that you hadn't heard from in 50 years.
So Howard, I have two more questions.
Anyway, that's newspapers.com.
Thank you. And we're going to get a list, and I'll send it to everyone who has signed up for this program. And then two more questions. JRI, is that Jewish Records Index? Is that what
Yes,
that stands
that's what it
for?
stands for. That's correct.
Okay. And then one other question, do you print out these articles or tie them in somehow to the family tree on the website?
I do both. I
Okay.
actually, in the book that I showed you that I did, that I printed 100 copies for everyone in the family, I copied articles, I copied census, but, you know, just for instance, here is, I talked about my great-grandparents. Here is, you know, Death Parks Knobloch couple on eve of 72nd anniversary. And this is my, I don't know if you can see it, my great-grandparents when they had their 70th anniversary. So I've gone all the way back. My grandmother, when she got married, the article that was in the paper in 1922. And when you talked about the census records, if I go all the way back, when I went to Europe, I talked about, you know, here is Aunt Lena when she was born, her records. Here's Aunt Gussie when her was born. When the woman in Slovakia said to me, you know, she looked at my grandfather, she said, you know, he was a twin. I said, yes, my Aunt Rose Flaster, I know that. So yes, I attach them to my charts, but I also print them up. I want to mention one other website before we go off that also has very good information for Europe, and it's called Gesher Galicia. And again, I'm going to send all this to Ann to distribute to everyone who was on tonight. But Gesher Galicia has excellent, excellent data. And Elaine, if your family is from Galicia, you may find records on there. And I want to thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, okay. Does anybody else have
Any
any
other
questions for
questions?
Howard? So I want to thank you, Howard, for this terrific, not only interactive, fascinating, and enriching presentation. It was absolutely wonderful, and I'm getting comments in the chat about how much people are enjoying it as you speak. As you know, Howard, it's because of this presentation that I have connected with two cousins on both my father and my mother's side of the family, cousins that I've never met before. Our next program, I'm just going to put in a little ad for this, which follows the genealogy. This genealogy program is about genealogy from the Torah. And it begins on Tuesday, December 7th at 7 o'clock. And it's called All in the Mishpacha. It's led by our scholar in residence, Rabbi Deborah Eisenman. This class will explore complicated family dynamics in the Torah and will relate them to managing our modern day lives. On Sunday, January 9th at 10 a.m., Josephine Gahn from the Jewish Community Relations Council, JCRC, will be presenting a program on anti-Semitism now. Also in January, Rabbi Deborah Eisenman will be conducting two presentations, one on ancient roots of anti-Semitism, and she'll also be leading a 3-session class entitled Building Blocks of a Compassionate Kehillah, or community. Please contact me or Temple Beth David for additional information about the synagogue or this year's adult ed programming. Thank you so much for your attendance and your participation, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you, Ann.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Howard. It was really